Today's presentation, Don McIlwain is actually, he's the chief of the, you can see on the slide here, the FOIA MDR Division of the National Declassification Center, which is part of NARA, the National Archives and Records Administration. For those of you who can see the slide down below, it says, releasing all we can, protecting what we must. I think that perfectly sums up what this group does. And Don will talk more about what this group does. It's particularly, today's subject is on this Form 14130, which is called the Classified Records Transfer Checklist. And Don is going to go through this form, show you what it's all about, why we use it, the purpose of it, what we do with that information, and that kind of thing. So rather than take any more of Don's time, I'll just go ahead and turn it over to Don. So go ahead and take it away, Don.
Great. Thank you, Jeff, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Again, my name is Don McIlwain. I'm the chief of the FOIA and MDR Division with the National Declassification Center. And what I'm going to do today is just give you all a little bit of an overview of the NDC, which is what we call the National Declassification Center, and then talk about this new form that we developed in consultation with our records management folks here at NARA and with our accessioning staff here at NARA and the broader declassification community to help make new transfers of classified accessions to NARA, make that go more smoothly. First of all, just the basics. I've gone to slide 2 here. Raise your hand online if you've ever heard of the National Declassification Center before. I'm just curious to see how that goes. And of course, I'm going to, looks like quite a few of you guys have. Great. Is there anyone out there who wants to share in chat what their idea is of what the NDC does? So I'm just curious to see what folks think that we do here in the NDC. Yes, it is for DoD. It's actually for all government agencies that have classified records. It's for all government agencies that have classified permanent records that are going to be transferred to the National Archives. And yes, we do review restricted records to declassify them before release to the public. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit more about what we do, how we were established. We are part of the National Archives and Records Administration, but we are an interagency group as well, and we work to declassify records across the government. And this form that I'll talk about a little bit later is one of the results of that effort. Establishing the NDC. The President in December of 2009 released Executive Order 13526. This executive order said this is how material will be classified and declassified. It also established the National Declassification Center. Specifically, he also issued a memorandum that accompanied that executive order that gave us focus here in the NDC on what we were supposed to do first. And that was we had to process for release or exemption according to one of 9 specific categories the approximately 408 million pages of archival federal records that had been accessioned to NARA, which is what we call the backlog. Tackling the backlog, as you can imagine, 408 million pages is quite a bit of material. To eliminate this multi-million page backlog by the President's deadline, we here at the NDC needed to do a number of things. We had to share equity recognition information between agencies. For example, if we had a classified Army document that had information that was of interest to, say, the CIA or the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Army needed to know what that information was so they could properly identify it and refer it. We had to adopt a risk management approach in processing these records for release to the public. We couldn't just say 408 million pages, we're going to go again through page by page, line by line, because these records by and large had already been reviewed in some cases multiple times, and they still hadn't had their classification status resolved. Conduct quality assurance reviews, and this is where the risk management goes into effect, of previously reviewed records. For example, more scrutiny would be paid to records that were originated in the Department of State's Bureau of Intelligence and Research versus records that may be nominally classified that originated in the Bureau of Cultural Affairs at the Department of State. So we needed to focus our limited resources, and this is NARA and multiple government agencies participating. We've got about 100 other agency declassification reviewers here at our facility in College Park partnering with us and working with us to knock out this backlog. And the ultimate goal was to eliminate the endless cycle of re-review and second guessing. One-time quality assurance review to stop the, re-review. I often think of it as a merry-go-round, and the records were on this merry-go-round, and they were going around and around, and they were never being told to stop and get off and be released. So we needed to end this cycle, and that's what the National Declassification, working collaboratively with, for those of you that are in agencies that have classified records, with your security and declassification program offices to achieve this. As Jeff mentioned at the bottom, our motto is releasing all we can, protecting what we must. And a fun little story that goes along with that is when we were discussing how we're going to create the National Declassification Center, what are the ground rules? Someone suggested, well, we need to have a motto or a slogan. And originally it was going to be protect what we must, release what we can. And ironically, it was the Central Intelligence Agency that said, well, shouldn't our focus really be releasing what we can first and then protecting what we must? So I'll give the CIA credit for focusing on release. And I see down here in the chat, that's a great question. What does NARA consider classified? We use the President's executive order, which sets out what is classified national security information. If those of you are familiar with FOIA, this would be information that's restricted under Exemption B1. So classified national security information is the President defining what needs to be protected from release to the public in the interests of national security. The President lays out 3 categories: confidential information where the release of that could cause harm or damage to the national security; secret information, which is information where the release of that could cause serious harm to the national security; or top secret information, where the unauthorized release of that could cause exceptionally grave damage to the national security. Now, those terms are not further defined, but the executive order lays out specific types of information that can be considered for classification. Among those, information relating to weapons of mass destruction, information relating to intelligence gathering sources and methods, information relating to sensitive diplomatic conversations, information relating to the protection of the President and other senior officials. So those are the kinds of information that's considered for classification, and that is spelled out actually in Section 1.4 of the executive order. That talks a little bit about what is classified, and then at the back end, once records have been determined to be permanent, we get the opposite end of that, the fun part, the declassification, determining which records can be released and which need that continued protection. So I hope that helps as much as So what are some of our measures of success? One of the big ones is improved communication between agency records management and declassification staffs. A sad but true story is a number of years ago, before the NDC was set up, NARA was still in the declassification of archival records business. And an agency, who will stay anonymous, asked about transferring some permanently valuable classified records to the National Archives. And I asked, well, have you, cleared that with your declassification or security program, because those records really should be reviewed if they're 25 years old or older. and I ended up introducing the agency's declassification manager to that agency's records manager. So we want to improve communication between agency records folks and agency security, information security, or declassification folks. One way, which I'll talk about in a little bit, is assistance to ensure that the review requirements as spelled out in Executive Order 13526 and in the amendments to the Defense Authorization Act that govern specific types of classified information relating to nuclear weapons, making sure that those requirements are met prior to transfer. And doing so will create a less likelihood that security violations will occur. One of the most unfortunate things that happens is, a 10-box accession of new records will show, direct offer from an agency, will show up on our loading dock and has come over as unrestricted, and we open up the box to verify that these are what they're supposed to be, and they have secret markings all over them. We want to prevent that before it gets started. And then, of course, we want to prevent another 400 million page backlog from building up, because the records are here at the National Archives. Unless there is a legitimate reason to hold them from the American people, these are the people's records. This is the people's archives. And we'd like to process and release what we can while protecting that small amount of sensitive material and preserving it for someday ultimately it being released that we must. To prevent the new backlog, we worked, as I mentioned, with agencies, with some of the records management folks here in the Washington area, with all of our partners and collaborators in the National Declassification Center, to come up with a checklist that would help prevent the new backlog by gathering certain types of information that we would be able to use when the records were accessioned. We're currently using it now with direct offers. For those of you not in the Washington area, and what's really cool is that's most of you guys on this webinar, we do an annual move from the Washington National Records Center to the National Archives. And WNRC, which is in Suitland, Maryland, houses the bulk of agencies' classified records in a record center environment. I think a couple of our other record centers, San Bruno and Seattle, also have classified holdings. But we do this annual move, and using this form in the upcoming move for next fiscal year. And we're still waiting for our directives people to work with the CFR folks to update the accessioning regulations that would memorialize these changes. On the PowerPoint, I've got a link to the form. I will go ahead and we'll spend the next few minutes walking through the form, and then I will open it up for questions and answers. But what we're really doing with this is asking for identifying information about the records that you're transferring, and then we're going to ask a series of questions that you as the records management person may not know off the top of your head, but this form is to facilitate a conversation with your information security or declassification folks as well. So here's the top of the form, and here's the bottom of the form. And the reason we have this is to prevent security problems and to make sure that we've got the ammunition we need so that we can promptly process the records for declassification that your agencies have reviewed. Before I go through this form, I'm aware that some of you guys may be in a situation where you're a small agency, your office is not at headquarters, but you perform an incredibly important part of your agency's mission. Some of the Department of Energy labs that are out, not in this area, for example, and they maintain and create classified permanent records. So they may want to reach out and touch their folks in headquarters to say, hey, I don't want to be on an island. I need to learn more about this. And at any time, if you've got questions, please contact me, and my contact info is here at the end of the slide presentation as well. Or you may be an agency that at one time had classified records. I was dealing with as an immigration and customs enforcement folks, and they were transferring records to NARA, and it was some of their investigatory files, and they came across documents that, as part of investigations on people, were FBI letterhead documents and were stamped secret. And they called me, and, again, normally not in that agency's course of business were they having this, but they came across it. There may have been a program that your agency did in the 1970s or 80s that is a retired program now, and they had classified. So if you're unfamiliar with national security classification and you don't know who or what to do, and you're trying to prepare records for transfer to the archives, anytime if you have questions, feel free to contact me in the NDC offices here. And if I don't know the answer, I will make sure I get it. If I need to get you in touch with someone in your agency's information security shop, I'm just a phone call or an email away. That said, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about this form. But for federal agencies transferring their classified records to the National Archives, accessioning them into NARA's custody, this form is really a way to help records officers make sure that the classified records proposed for accessioning have had the requirements by your agency's declassification program, or again, your agency may not have a declassification program. They may be in a situation where you don't have a lot of classified records, and a lot of times if it's because, again, the investigation example, another agency provided you information that was classified and they're in your investigative files, we'll work with that other agency who's going to have the primary equity or interest in those records to help you out. That's one of the things collaboratively we do as part of the National Declassification Center. But what we want to do is make sure that the records have been reviewed as required by the law and by the executive order. The form is designed to improve communications and your information security officers. Before I was in declassification, I did archival processing for a number of years. And, the last thing I want to do is hurt our sources of job security. And you agency folks out there that are, creating the records, and you records management people who are, retiring the records and getting them ready to be accessioned, you're my job security. So I want to make sure that, we can keep everybody from stumbling in a security standpoint. The form will really prevent a new backlog of records, because one of our biggest problems with our 400 million page backlog is records have been reviewed, but they may not have been properly reviewed. The agency declass reviewers early on may not have been properly trained. Markings were not standardized. Again, I like to tell stories to illustrate that. And before we created a standardized way of marking documents for declassification or continued classified protection, agencies were basically doing it on their own. So if you had a collar or a tab, which is what we would call the strip of acid-free paper that we would surround a classified document with, an agency may have just put the letter R. Well, did R mean release? Did R mean retain? Another agency may be using a letter D. Did that mean deny, or did it mean declassify? And, so we didn't know, so we were guessing. So one of the other improvements is there's a standard form that your declassification folks will be using when they're reviewing the records. Again, we want to make sure that classified information is properly identified and stored appropriately. And if we know what's coming in as far as accessioning of classified records, we can better assist ourselves and our agency partners in work planning and prioritization. if I know that the Joint Staff is sending us 200 feet of their classified central file, and I know that they've done the review and it looks like they've exempted about 10% of the documents from declassification, but another 20% of the documents they've referred to intelligence agencies for referral. I can out-year plan with the intelligence community agencies that they are going to need to have certain resources here to complete their reviews of referrals. Another question, how might I help agencies who are reluctant to transfer classified records? And that's a great question. And one of the ways we can do that is to work with agencies on better, for example, this form, better education, better training. The National Declassification Center is going to be holding an amazing, and a sequester, we're still able to pull this off, a training conference in June, and the focus is going to be on protecting records and identifying records that are eligible for continued exemption beyond 50 years. So how do we work with agencies? It's education. We do try to brief our declassification partners on proper records handling and records management. The National Records Management Program at NARA and the National Declassification Center are putting the final touches on a class that I think is going to be initially offered live, but I believe they're going to create an online version as well, designed to educate our information security professionals about records management basics, and at the same time educate records management professionals about information security management. So, we of course remind people that we don't mix records of one agency with another. And yes, there are some agencies out there that are extremely concerned that they're very sensitive, and some records, very old records, can still be very sensitive. So we talk about that. We talk a little bit about our track record and our collaboration with the agencies here. We have representatives from the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Department of Energy, all of the military services, the Department of State, that we work collaboratively here with. And I'm happy and willing, and in fact, if there's anyone from Hawaii, I would even be willing to do a site visit to help educate. Actually, there's a lot of places in the country I'd be willing to do a site visit. I just like to throw that one out because it's the obvious one. But if folks want to talk about how do we safeguard that protecting what we must part of our mission as well, and improving training, improving equity recognition among agencies. Part of the reason that we had that merry-go-round is agencies didn't know what another agency considered sensitive. Well, if you don't tell me what of your program is sensitive in my records, how can I identify it for you? So we've come a pretty long way of improving and standardizing that training. The Department of Energy, in my opinion, still has the gold star for equity recognition training, and they have a 4-day certification program that leads to recognition that you are trained in recognizing Department of Energy's sensitive information within records. It doesn't allow you to declassify their information, but it certifies that you're trained and you've passed their class on recognizing their information. Other agencies are developing this kind of training as well, and one of the challenges is this is a great forum here. I think this virtual classroom is wonderful. Sometimes you need a secure environment such as the SIPRNet, which is a DoD classified network at the secret level for delivering this kind of training to folks that may not be able to attend live. So I think the technological tools and the networks are out there for us to reach out. And I think as we move forward, this is something I would love to take back to our folks and say, hey, look at what records management is doing to get training and get the message out there. How can we do that for declassification training as well? The 14130, let me kind of go through the nuts and bolts of the form right now. Some of this, may seem logical. Some of it may seem, well, what did they really mean? The agency is, who's the creator or custodian of the records? That's, again, pretty self-explanatory. Agency ID. This may be a local identification number. Some agencies have their own record centers, and they use a different format than the federal record centers to track transfers of records to their accessions. You may have a record series that is informally and colloquially known by something throughout your agency, and your historical researchers may know those records by that as well, but it's not the official title of the records on the in the record schedule. The agency declassification manager, this is the person who is either in charge of your agency's declassification program or possibly in very large programs, the person who's in charge of the section that we could reach out to at the NDC if we needed to get some declassification questions answered. The FRC transfer number, since most classified records are accessioned when they're 25 years old, for a long time we'll still be using the old FRC number, but for newer records, that would be the ARCGIS TR number. And then a phone number, a contact information for if we need to reach out to that declassification. The series or collection title, that can be taken right from the transfer request. The box numbers, the container numbers. Sometimes we'll get boxes, FRC boxes in that have multiple box numbers on them because records have been either split out or they may have been initially retired as unscheduled, and then parts of the accession were scheduled as permanent, parts were scheduled as temporary. If you can think of a weird, funky situation of records in a record center, we've probably seen it here when classified records get transferred. And then the disposition authority, just the schedule number in item. Substantive questions. These are the questions that you as a records manager may be having to reach out to the declassification person to answer, or if you have no declassification person or you don't know who that person is, that's, again, another place where you can contact us here, and we'll work with you to get answers to the questions. Or, again, if it's, well, we don't have anyone to review the records, we're in an agency that doesn't classify records, but these case files are full of documents, and based on what I can see, they're stamped secret, and they say Federal Bureau of Investigation on them. Well, then we'll reach out and work with that agency to help you get these records retired to the archives. The first question we ask is, have the records been reviewed as required by the executive order? And that's a simple yes or no. And for some of you, that may be a pretty easy question. Is that the next one would be, have these either been reviewed by a trained historical records restricted data reviewer, which is going back to that Department of Energy certification program I was mentioning, or can you certify that they're highly unlikely to contain restricted data or formally restricted data? And RDFRD is a special category of classified information relating to the use, construction, and design of nuclear weapons and special nuclear fuels and things like that. This form rides along with the transfer material when the records are being accessioned to the archives, and this is really, for a records manager, is a tool for you to reach out to the declassification manager to get the answers to those questions, because we're guessing that you as a records manager are probably not likely to be the expert on the declassification of these records. But if records got sent here because they didn't have proper declassification action, you could be the person taking the hit and that's what we don't want. That's why we've developed this form to be a vehicle to help you reach out to them. I'm looking at more of these questions. I'm new in records management and POCs. How do I know who would be the security declassification? It may be, and that's a good question. If you don't know who it is for an Army installation, ultimately, yes, it's going to be RMDA, and the person who is the declassification guru for Army, if you send me an email, I can get you her contact information. Her name's Melissa Walker, and she is very good. And, she may know who at your specific facility is the liaison, but she manages the National Declass program for the Army. So I can get you hooked up. And there should be contacts, for the military, and again, for most other agencies, all the services have a declass program. Many of the other agencies may or may not, but even someone that you wouldn't think would, Department of Commerce, they have not a lot of classified records, but you may find something if you're a commerce person outside of Washington, and we can get you hooked up with your declassification colleagues here and help you out as well. But the military has a very robust program for each of the services. Then we ask, have all the exemptions and referrals been appropriately identified? And I mentioned earlier that agencies used to do all sorts of things, strips of paper. Well, there's now a standard form that will help identify what's exempt from declassification or what has been referred to another agency because it needs to be looked at. And then a place for additional comments or explanations. If your comment is simply help, again, give us a call. The goal of this is to get the records safely transferred here so we can process them, protect the information that is still sensitive. And again, you may know what's sensitive for your agency, but you may not know what the other agency was conducting business with your agency and what's sensitive for their agency. And so that's why we want to help you guys with this form. That's the end of my formal presentation. You see my contact information here. Please give me a call or shoot me an email. I see, do we have sufficient staff to conduct the reviews? To be quite honest, I don't think there's a single agency out there that will tell you they have sufficient staff to do everything, either from a records management standpoint or from a declassification standpoint. But I know that all of the military services have people with expertise in doing the reviews, and all of them have people that have the appropriate training for recognizing, again, especially military services with where nuclear weapons may have been stationed or tested or stored. They have folks that are trained that we can put you in touch with the appropriate people and reach out that way. Seeing that you're talking about more than nuclear, by RD I was specifically meaning restricted data, which is a kind of a term of art for information classified under the Atomic Energy Act. There's certainly research and development for proprietary information, and sometimes that's not even security classified, but is information that may be restricted, and that's where on your transfer agreement you're going to want to note that it's restricted, and if you have the particular statute or the particular CFR citation, make sure that we know that when the records are coming to the National Archives. That is incredibly helpful to our accessioning people and our processing people. And, that's what we want to make sure is I'm dealing specifically in the national security classification realm, but, there are other restrictions. Some of you folks that may be with law enforcement agencies, you have investigatory files. People in certain, Department of Education and Health and Human Services with different kinds of case files that have very sensitive data on individuals. We need to know those restrictions as well. And if you have the particular statutory reason why information can't be released, including that on the transfer agreement is going to be helpful, and it will allow us, when someone requests information under a FOIA, to apply that appropriately as a B3 statutory hold. So, again, there's more than just national security information. My talk today was focusing on that because that's my primary world. Another question: your records officer may know about the executive order. Again, some may not have the familiarity that we would like them to have, but I think we had a link to the EO on here, and the executive order, as well as some other information about national security information, and the executive order's implementing directive are on the Information Security Oversight website, which is nara.gov/ISOO, ISOO.
Don, I'm scrolling through some of the questions. I don't know if you covered this one yet. This one's from Kathleen. She's asking, are all agencies required to have an agency declassification manager? And where is this requirement stated? I don't know did you cover that one yet?
No, I didn't. And agencies that have no classified records or classified information wouldn't have a declassification program manager, but the concept of a senior agency official for classification and declassification is in the Executive Order 13526 and its implementing directive. But if you're an agency that creates or receives no classified, then it wouldn't apply to you. The situation where the challenge may come up is your agency is an agency that has no classification authority, has no that you know of national security classified records or information, but at some time in the past, for a small window of time for some reason, your agency was involved with that, and there's nobody to help you at your agency now. And so if you come across that, we and ISOO, Information Security Oversight Office, will work with you to get in touch with the appropriate, possibly successor agency, or to get that handled so that you're not put at risk. But yeah, the concept of a senior agency official for classified information security is in the executive order and the implementing directive.
All right. Well, if we don't have any further questions, I will wish you a wonderful afternoon. We'll hang out just a little bit longer in case there are any other issues we need to resolve or any last-minute questions. Otherwise, have a fabulous rest of your afternoon. We wish you good weather and good records management, and we hope that we'll see you online in a session in the future. And a huge thank you to Don. I learned so much today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. This was a wonderful opportunity for me, and like I said, as great as this is an online classroom tool, there's a part of me, especially with some of the weather that you guys had out there, I wish I could have been there in person. But thank you for attending.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you found this seminar useful. For more information about the U.S. National Records Management Training Program, please visit www.archives.gov. Also, our current workshop schedule for both face-to-face and web-based training is available online at nara.learn.com.